Good stuff. Okay, I'm going to invite Rob Riley to come up today to introduce our speaker, and we're so blessed and glad that he's here. So can't wait to hear about it. So Rob, come on down.
Hi everybody. Thanks for coming out. I love the crowd that we have here today. I'm glad that we've got some extra attention for our speaker. Tell you a little bit about Brad. I have known Brad for about 12 years, and this is before, all the kids and stuff like that. We've known each other for a long time. For me personally, when I think about stories of optimism, his story is an extremely rare one for me. Like most of the people in this room, I have kids. The biggest fear I have in my entire life is something happening to one of my kids. Just without a doubt, there's nothing in the world that can touch that. And when you're dealing with some dire circumstances with one of your children, it is easy to lose your positive attitude. It's easy to question your faith. It's easy to do a lot of these things. Some people have really been side by side with Brad through this journey, and I've been blessed enough to be there for different parts of it. The things that stand out to me was, first night, Christian's down at Riley Hospital, I'm down there with Brad. The first night after his first major surgery, I'm standing there with Brad. It is one thing for people to talk about their faith. It is one thing for people to talk about how positive they would be and maintain such a great mindset when they're faced with dire circumstances. For me personally, I sat there and watched another father with a 6-year-old son knee deep in these horrible circumstances that nobody ever wishes on anybody. And during those times, still strong in his faith, still maintaining a positive outlook, still caring about everybody else around him. For me, that is just exceptional. I've known Brad for a really long time, and I have always known him to be a fantastic human being. And I think it's funny, but it's also humbling. But it's neat to see that everybody else gets to see what I've already known about him. So one of my best friends in the world. This is Brad Doherty. Follow that up.
I think that's the best introduction I've ever had. I don't know who all might be familiar and who might not be familiar with what happened and when it happened and all that. So I'm going to kind of do a small recap of how everything got started. I have 4 kids. I have a 14-year-old, and I have an 8-year-old, and I have 2 6-year-olds. They're twins, boy-girl twin. Christian, Grace are the boy-girl twin, and then we have Elijah, and then Madison. So let's see here. It's about 108 days ago. 108 days ago, I was with my 6-year-old, and we were swimming. They did some swimming stuff at Delta. Good time. The kids were enjoying it, and he jumped off the diving board for the first time. It was an exciting moment for a dad. I was excited. He'd come up, and he'd come up out of the water, and he goes, Dad, do you know why I jumped off? Because he was really reluctant to jump off this diving board. And he said, Dad, do you know why I jumped off? And I said, why? He goes, because a scout is always brave. Mm-hmm. And he just started getting into scouts, and he just that was what it was that made him jump. Next day, we watched. It was Sunday, and that's the 107 days ago. We watched E.T., and I drank Crystal Pepsi. I don't know if anybody knows what Crystal Pepsi is. I'm sure, yeah. But when I was growing up, Crystal Pepsi was a big deal, and so I brought Crystal Pepsi home, and we bought Reese's Pieces, and we watched E.T. and we had a great day. Now, that is the last day that Christian remembered. The next day was Monday, and I went to church, and I did my normal, we have a group that meets, and I did my normal thing, and went home, and kids were in bed. I think they were, jostling around, my 8-year-old, And I laid down and I was talking to my wife about Christmas. And typical parents, it's October. You're thinking about Christmas. How are we going to afford it? How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to do this? And now, like I said, I have 4 kids at home, so screaming is not unusual in our household. It's not. However, it was about 10:30. We heard the worst scream I think I'd ever heard. And it was different. Something was different about that scream. And if your parents know, you can always tell. You can always lay down, especially dads. I think that dads have this innate ability to kind of know what's going on just by hearing it. But, I hear the kids scream and you can just, go quiet, yell. But this was something different. And I got up and I opened my bedroom door and there was Christian laying on the ground. And he was just screaming. So I pick him up and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Now, I thought he was having a very severe migraine. And the reason I thought that was 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before that, we actually went to Riley Hospital and met with a neurologist. And that neurologist did a check and he passed all the neuro exams and everything was okay. Everything seemed normal and they just gave him some prescription for some migraine medicine and then just keep an eye on it type thing. And the headaches that he was getting weren't really that bad. It was like, oh, dad, I got a headache. And he would run off and he'd go play. Nothing that you would expect, but it was happened frequent enough that we went ahead and had an appointment. Now, that moment, back to that moment where he's laying on the floor and he's screaming, I pick him up and all I can think is, oh, he's having a migraine, something like that. So I try to comfort him in bed and he's just, rocking and we're trying to decide, do we call an ambulance or is this just something, so we're trying to decide in those moments. Seems like forever, but it probably was a matter of 10 minutes, if that, But I took him to his room, and I kind of tried to comfort him, and he wasn't really. He was just not real responsive. All of a sudden, he went completely unresponsive. He went completely limp in my hands, and a 6-year-old in your hands that is not responsive. We went into emergency mode at that point, of course, and and I'm yelling for my wife, and I'm smacking him, trying to anything to get him alert. He wasn't anything. I checked his heart. His heart was beating. Checked his breath. He had breath. I didn't see how long. I didn't go through the whole procedure. How whatever, but it was there. And we took him downstairs, called everything, and then of course, later that day, or later that evening, was when we got the diagnosis of kind of what was going on. So we went to Riley, got lifelined over there, or tried to get lifelined. Lifeline wouldn't run. And that's a terrible thing to hear in the hospital. When you're in the hospital and you're sitting outside and you hear, this is an emergency, this is a life or death situation, and we're hearing them telling Riley that you have to get somebody here now in a helicopter because it's life or death, and it's just like, it was so fast. It was such a blur that night. I posted on Facebook a call to prayer, and that's where it all started. Now, Christian was diagnosed with a brain tumor. This brain tumor was malignant, and the crazy thing is that this particular tumor, only 1% of the tumors come through the Riley. This is what they were explaining to me, is 1% of the tumors come through Riley that are this particular tumor. 1% of those tumors are malignant. So it's such a rare, it's 1% of 1%. The other piece to this was the genetic fusion that happened had never been seen before in the world. So he's a first. So this particular gene fusion that happened. Now, during the time at the hospital, my child's in there, and he went through 3 brain surgeries. The first brain surgery was the emergency one, and it was to drain and do all of these things. And then second and third, I'll explain those shortly. Now, while I was in the hospital, there were so many miracles that happened, and so many different things that happened during that time there. this was the worst thing that ever happened to our family and the absolute best thing that ever happened to our family, all in the same one. I say that because during the time at Riley, we spent 66 days in Riley Hospital. Me, my wife, and I, and Christian, 66 days in the hospital. And a lot of people would ask, why don't you just go home? Why don't you go home? I mean, who's going to go home? Who do I send home? Do I tell my wife, oh, you got to go home? You got to go home. No, that's not gonna happen. I don't want to leave his side. So we had somebody, my family took over and they handled my family, my young kids. Now, when I was at the hospital, I thought the entire time I was there, I focused on why I was there. I couldn't focus on why Christian was there. I couldn't focus on it. Christian was unresponsive. He was out of it in drugs and who knows what all they put him on. He was, from my perspective, he was in pain. But I couldn't figure out why I was there. And later I come to find out there's a lot of things, there's a lot of reasons I was there. One being my Facebook post. The Facebook post alone, one day it's 30 people like it and respond, and then 100 people, and then 200 people, and then 300 people, and so on. Next thing I know, there's 3,000 people liking my post. People were seeing things as I was writing, and they were taking it, and it was touching their lives. The reach I had was actually, I reached people in Italy. I got messages from people in Italy, Madrid, Spain. There was some from Africa. It was an amazing reach. Canada. There was so many people, and social media allowed this to kind of just spread. All of the U.S., every state in the U.S. I got a message from somebody in Italy, and it was in Italian, and I translated with Google Translate to see what it said, and it said, "God help this child." 3 people in Afghanistan, they were Muslims, were praying for my child, and they were praying. They were Muslims and they were praying for Christian, and it was just such a beautiful reach. I mean, there was no boundaries, and through the entire Facebook, the entire experience that God led us on, it was amazing. The journey was just absolutely amazing. I saw families that struggled and lost their children, and I helped comfort those people. Some believed in God, some didn't, and even my Facebook friends, some believed in God, some didn't, and that's okay. It was a neat. They all got something from it. In fact, the community, how the community came together for our family was just absolutely amazing. It started actually 40 days, which we're actually at the 40 days. We've been home for 40 days now. And when I look back, our 40-day post was actually the benefit. There was a benefit. The school did some things for our family. It was a bake sale, and they did a ton of different things. They did a lunch where you go and come and see. The entire community in Albany just gathered around this, and they provided for our family. It actually allowed us to eat and things like that, things that you don't think about while you're there. My wife wasn't working. I was, I just started a new business not too long ago, so you can imagine where cash flow is at that point, So people just helped. And then the next thing I know happened, there was a benefit auction. Some of you might be aware of that. It raised, now, I still don't know what our needs are. I don't know what we need. I don't even know if we needed money. I do know that we were blessed and God provided. And that auction raised, at first we thought $43,000, which that was just from the community here in Muncie. I was absolutely floored at how much was raised. Shortly after, I got another check for $10,000. This came from New York City. This was a artist that was a famous artist in the 70s and 80s. His son actually gave us $10,000. Doesn't know us, has no clue who we are, and sent us a check. That story, the Facebook story, just touched so many lives. So why was I at the hospital? Well, for one, to share the story. And then number two is Christian doesn't remember any of the pain. Nothing from the pain, he remembers any of it, doesn't remember any of it. Now, the beautiful part about this story is that Monday, when it happened, he remembers E.T. and Reese's Pieces. And then Monday, no memory of it. To rehab. And rehab is when things get better and you don't remember, he doesn't remember any of that between there. So he doesn't remember any of the pain. It's almost as if God removed it from him. He doesn't have those painful memories at all. He's not scared at all to go to the doctor. He goes, no problem. Smiles, enjoys it. Now, I know I'm kind of rambling back and forth, and I'm sorry for that, but the second surgery that happened, everything kind of went bad. We were actually, oddly enough, something that was not up on Facebook was we were actually smiling during that time, during the second surgery. We were enjoying just knowing that God was in control of this. And we laughed and just enjoyed each other, my wife and I. I mean, what else were we to do? We could lay and soak and cry and wait. And we didn't start getting worried until they started saying there was a pint of blood that was given. Then a second pint of blood. And I guess it's pints. I don't know. Whatever the bags, whatever they are. And then there was, next thing we know, there was 4 things of blood given. And then we started kind of wondering, what's going on in here? Later, come to find out, that second surgery, the doctor comes out, and he looks like he'd just been through war. I mean, he just, it just looked awful. And he came and sat down, and he sat down with us, and he just said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Your kid is alive," is how he worded it. We didn't know what to expect and where this was going to lead. And at that moment, that was a big moment for us, because at that moment, we were actually looking at it, and you could just tell there was anger building up. We started to get angry. We were getting angry at God. We were getting angry at whatever. My wife and I both, you could just see it. In fact, while he was there, I had my arm around my wife. She was sitting in a chair, and I was almost squeezing too hard. She's just like, "You're choking me," And this didn't get posted in Facebook, but I looked at my wife at that moment, and here the doctor sitting, telling us that the tumor's malignant, that this is a rare case. Again, we've heard rare, I don't know how many times. His brain didn't react correctly, and we couldn't get the brain back in, so they had to actually just go in for surgery. He scrubbed back in, and they had to hurry and just start sucking part of the brain out. They didn't know how he was going to make. They thought his whole left side would be completely not movable. Not to look at paralyzed. And they thought that his mind, he'd lose a significant portion of thought, and they didn't know what all was going to happen. And so we're sitting there hearing this from the doctor, and then he looks at us and he says, "This is out of my hands. This is only in God's hands. I've done everything I can surgically. If he makes it tomorrow, and if he makes it the next day or the next day," we had 3 days. And there was 3 days where we weren't sure if he was going to make it. Now, I had accepted that God would do what he does. Not that he would heal my child, but I accepted his will, no matter what it was. And at that moment, I sat down, I look at my wife, and she's crying, of course, and I'm crying. And And I grab her and I just look at her because I knew we were getting angry. And I just looked at her and I said, we're not going to get mad at God through this. And I said it 4 times. I don't know if it was 2 times to convince her and 2 times to convince myself. I don't know. But at that moment, we really let go and really let God handle it. No matter if it was to heal our child or not. And I think it required that let go. I don't know that the story would have panned out the same way had I not let go. Now, Christian exceeded all odds, and he is now reading at a 4th grade level. He's a 1st grader, reading at a 4th grade level. He is testing out at a 3rd grade level. And I and our family and I have learned so much about people, about God, faith. I would have never learned these without this situation. I hate that it had to happen to our child. I love that the way that it happened, that God relieved him of that pain, and everything's going to be okay. And at this point, the medication that he's taking doesn't have any side effects. He's taking chemo and he doesn't have any side effects of this chemo. It's a very targeted chemo. They had a genetics team find a target, and they were able to find this one piece, this one target. The medications, $10,000 a month. They denied it the first time, as insurance does. It's an experimental drug, and they approved it for 6 months. He has to take it for a full year, so we don't know what will happen. I don't know that we need needs or that we have needs, but God's been kind of leading that journey on our side. We just let it happen however he's got it. I've got a ton of things to say, and I'm really sorry. I know this is there were some times in the hospital, and I want to kind of share just a few pieces of what it was like to be in the hospital for that long, for those 66 days. And there was a couple of families that really stuck out to us. And when we were there, and I was always very concerned about other people when we were there. And I'm not patting myself on the back or anything like that, but that was why I was there. What else? I mean, the only other option I had was to sit in the room, and watch a child who can't do anything. We just had to wait for a doctor to come and give us some idea what was going on. So during that time, I was actually going around and I would, you can call it a ministry, you can call it whatever, but I would just be there for people. And when you're in the hospital, when you're at Riley, there's good days and there's bad days. And that's all there is. There's no in between. It's always a good day or a bad day. So instead of asking how people are, because you're a mess regardless, you just are. What you'd ask is it a good day or a bad day? Or at least that's what I started doing. And some would say, it's a bad day, and such, and it's a good day. And you just kind of known that every single day was different, and every person there was going through their own struggle and their own journey. And some were handling it very well, and some were handling it very poorly. And it was a neat experience. There's one incident that really touched my heart. It was a family, I'm not going to say their names just because I haven't really asked, but this particular family, their child had a shunt put in, and that shunt failed. A shunt, does everybody know what a shunt is? Kind of goes in the brain, it drains some of the liquid. Usually your body absorbs this stuff, but if your body's not absorbing correctly, it'll drain out. They were actually going to give Christian one of these, and I actually looked at the doctor and said, I know that you were going to give him that shunt, but if you remember correctly, there was a complication. He got kind of sick, and there was some sickness that happened. So they thought it was part of that, and turns out he didn't have to get the shunt. And it was a beautiful story because this child that was there with this family, his shunt had malfunctioned, and they were actually, he was gone. He was brain dead at that point, and they, what I seen though from this family was such positive and encouraging. They were going through losing their child. This child's, I think, around 14 years old, 12 to 14. And they were going through getting ready to lose their child. And they stopped taking him off of life support, and they went ahead and waited so they could give up organ donation. And I sat and talked to the nurses, and I came kind of a regular. I was always there, so the nurses kind of got used to me. And I just said, hey, this particular family, if you could, just let me know when the organ donation team comes, and so that way I can kind of be there for them. And so the nurse come, and she couldn't really tell me anything. Like, she just said basically, hey, the organ donation team's here, and you take it as you will. So I walked out and I saw that family, and earlier that day I'd gotten them a cup of coffee. I run over to Starbucks, had to drive all over Indianapolis to find it because it was closed in this area, and we had to drive all over. But we got them a cup of coffee, and I was sitting there, and as they were walking by, and I ducked down in the nourishment room, and I sat there and I prayed, and I did my prayer, and I looked up, and they started coming by. I'm knowing they know what's happening. I mean, it's they're taking their child, and they're giving it to somebody else. And of course they're crying and things are happening, and the most beautiful thing happened, and I looked up, and I'm in the nourishment room, and I see them come by, and I see the mother look up at me, and she just looked at me and said, thank you. Thank you. And it, to this day, it's hard to imagine what they went through, and it's hard to, I don't know what the words I'm trying to say are, but it was pretty amazing to see the way that they gracefully handled this, and the way that this situation, they allowed it to be used for good. Even though it was probably the worst, in fact I know it was the worst day of their lives, and yet they still found blessing in it. And I was in awe of that family, and I think a lot of people are in awe of our family, but that family stands out to me because, like Rob said, unless you're in the heat of it, you don't know what you're going to do in those situations. I saw people get angry. I saw people handle it in so many different ways. But that family will forever be a part of my life, and I'll never forget that moment when she looks up and just tells me thank you. Everybody has their own take from what Facebook has given them and what this message has been. I'm going to go ahead and stop it right there. And like I said, Christian is doing amazing. He's walking, he's talking. We have the child we had on day 107 till now. We have that same child. There's no brain damage, no damage. He's just Christian, and it's amazing. And if you've ever met him, you would just be in awe of where he has been and where he's come.